Can you just explain who you are, and maybe for people who don't know, who never heard of the blue eye, brown eye exercise, could you just talk a little bit about that and just the kind of reaction you got from it?
Yeah, the reason I'm being interviewed by people this week is because I did the blue eye. I separated my students, my third grade students, in all white, all Christian, Riceville, Iowa, in 1968, April 5th, the day after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, because I had no way to explain to those all-white children why Martin Luther King was in the street and what he was protesting. There was no way I could explain to them the hatred that engendered in white people, the fear that engendered in white people, and the anger that his being in the street engendered in white people. I couldn't explain it. There is no explanation for that kind of insanity. So I decided that as I was watching the interviews done by the ever so brilliant moderators the night after he was killed, that not only we were going to learn the Sioux Indian prayer the next day, because we were doing the Indian unit, which you do in third grade in the spring, because kids are tired of school, so you give them something they'll really be excited about, and they were really excited about the Indian unit. The next day we were going to learn the Sioux Indian prayer, which says, "Oh, Great Spirit, keep me from ever judging a man until I've walked a mile in his moccasins." I decided that the next day, not only was I going to teach them that prayer, I was going to arrange to have it answered for them, because I was going to do what we do in this country on a daily basis. I was going to separate my group according to a physical characteristic over which they had no control. I was going to assign negative traits to those who had the wrong physical characteristic. I was going to treat them as though all the negative things I was saying about them were absolutely true. I was going to lower my expectations for them. I was going to force them to live down to my expectations of them. And when they did, I was going to blame their behavior, not on my treatment of them, but on that physical characteristic. I didn't know what physical characteristic to use. I couldn't use age. I was the only old one in that room. I couldn't use height. We've used that, and I was taller than those third graders. I'm not taller than them anymore. I couldn't use weight because we have discriminated against people on the basis of their being too heavy for years. I couldn't use gender. I did not intend to reinforce sexism. I decided that I couldn't use hair color because it's too easy to change. I decided that I would do what Hitler did. One of the ways they decided who went into the gas chamber or the camps was eye color. If you had a good German name, but you had brown eyes, they figured you were a Jewish person who was trying to pass, and they sent you to the concentration camps. Hundreds of thousands of people died in Germany during the Nazi regime because they had the wrong color eyes. I decided that the next morning I would separate my group according to the color of their eyes, and that brown-eyed people would be on the top the first day, because in this country, brown-eyed people, most of the people of color are brown-eyed, and they have been on the bottom for as long as they need to be. It's absolutely insane. So the next day I decided I was going to be insane in my classroom for a day, and I was going to reverse the exercise on the following Monday. I didn't know how this exercise would work. If I had known how it would work, I might not have done it because of the ugliness that came after it. Not from those students, and not from many of the parents, but from 20% of the parents who heard about what I had done, and from the vast majority of the teachers. And the teachers still haven't gotten over it.
Was it surprising, the fact that the people in the community had such a negative reaction to you making these children feel discriminated against for just a short period of time? Their argument was that it was so traumatic that it was just unthinkable. What do you think about that reaction?
Well, you see, that reaction is the same one that I get every time I do the exercise with adults now. They don't realize that what I do with groups for a day when it's school children that were in my classroom, or for an hour and a half, or for 20 minutes when I do it with adults, they don't realize that the way they are being treated in that short time is the way people of color in this country have been treated for over 400 years. They don't make that connection. The only thing they can say is like the woman from Canada when they showed the film that was made in the second year I did the exercise, that CBC sent a film crew to film my second group of third graders through it. When they took that to Canada, their switchboard went crazy because people were so angry about what I was doing with those poor little white kids in Riceville, Iowa. So they called me and asked me to come to Toronto so that we could discuss this. Well, discuss means 200 angry Canadians sitting there looking down on you and questioning you as to why you dared to do that with those poor little white children. Almost the first person who stood up said, don't you think you could do great psychological damage by using that exercise with them for a day? I said, if you're concerned about the damage that's done with the eye color exercise for a couple of hours or for a day in my classroom, you must be absolutely infuriated by what happens to people of color in your country and mine for a lifetime. And this is what she said. That's different. They're used to it. They can take it. Now think about that. We actually think that it's all right to do this to people of color on a daily basis for a lifetime because they can take it. But to do this to white children or to white adults for a few hours or for a day is too hard, and we can't take it. We people, we white people. And they'll say to me, well, that's different. It's different for me because I haven't been treated that way before. How fortunate could you possibly be to be able to say, I've never had that experience before in my life? When that little black third grader, that little black girl, has had that experience all her life and has been expected to get used to it and take it. And when a woman running for the presidency right now called young men in gangs super predators who need to be brought to heel. Now, what did that do to black women whose sons, or white women or Hispanic women whose sons were being referred to in those ways? See, it doesn't stop with children of color in this country after the school day is over. It doesn't stop for them in this country as long as they live. And they can look back on things just that bad that happened to their parents and their grandparents, and we're still doing it. Did I answer your question? Probably not.
You've seen different waves of activism, and what would you say people that were fighting for civil rights in the 60s to now? What do you think is different in the way that people approach their activism?
Number one, I'm not an activist. I'm an angry white woman who realizes that there's only one race, the human race. All these others, all this racism is just color groups. We're talking about color groups. White is a color group. It isn't a race. Black is a color group. It isn't a race. All these members of all these different color groups are members of my race. They're members of my family. I don't appreciate it when people imprison or enslave members of my family for some ridiculous reason. And the reason is really worse than ridiculous, because we are using it to reinstitute slavery in the United States of America. And if you know anything about the prison industrial complex, then you know that we have reinstituted slavery in this country. We're building more prisons today than we are schools, and we know who we're building them for. And it ain't old white women.
And so what do you think, are you hopeful for, I guess, race relations moving forward in the future? Let's
not talk about race relations. Let's talk about human relations.
Okay.
Because when you can put it in when you say race, then people get all these colors in their heads, and they react to all those negative stereotypes about those who are different from themselves. Let's talk about human relations. When we really start talking about human relations and regard all people as equally human, then we won't have to worry about race and racism. Racism is a relatively new phenomenon. It came about 500 years ago when they started trying to destroy the Jews. Then they used the same techniques to destroy Native Americans when we white folks came to this country, and the same techniques and when we killed off a whole lot of Native Americans, then we imported blacks from Africa through England to do the job that we were having people of color do, Native Americans do in this country. And we have justified those behaviors by saying we're Christians. And we're going to Christianize them, and we're going to civilize them. And so people of color realize that Christianity, being Christianized and being civilized, means we kill you if you don't agree, or we imprison you.
Okay, so do you think things have gotten better?
I think they were getting better when I was 35.
Okay.
They aren't getting better now. We've taken drastic steps backward in the last 20 years. Drastic steps backward. And we're on a really ugly trail here if we don't change things. I'm not terribly impressed by the people who are trying to make the changes, because many of the changes they're trying to make are trying to restore us to the 1940s. Those were not the good old days. Ronald Reagan thought they were the good old days because he's a white male. And in the 1940s up to the 1950s, it was good to be a white male because you had all the power and you had all the money and you had all the wealth and you had all the opportunities. I don't want to go back to those days, pre-civil rights, pre-women's movement. I don't want to go back to those. But those are considered the good days by many people in this country, and they're wrong. Those were only good days for white males with money. And they were very, very good then. Everybody knew their place and kept their place. But then people of color got out of their place, and then women were allowed to get out of their place in order to put a stop order on the civil rights movement. It was better for white males to put their emphasis on white women, because make no mistake about this, the women's movement might as well have been carrying signs that said, black women need not apply. So this whole thing is about how to maintain what we had in the 40s. You can't do it, it's not going to happen. They've opened Pandora's box, and now the stuff is out. And you're going to have to, but the real fear in this country today, as I see it and as I watch it happen, is the fear that white people are going to lose their numerical majority in the United States of America, and people of color are going to start treating us the way we have treated them. And as long as you think of us as different races, you'll think that way and you'll be scared that way. But we're all members of the same race, and we're all in this mess together. And it's going to take all of us to pull us out.
Recently, with Beyonce and the criticism she's been receiving for her Super Bowl performance, which seemed inoffensive to me, could you talk about just the reaction and just what you think about that?
Oh, that's ridiculous. They should be more concerned about how badly that game was played, quite frankly. Particularly in the amount of money those men were making to play that game. I didn't watch Beyonce on the Super Bowl because I got so disgusted with the game that I switched channels. And that probably would have been a good idea for a lot of people. If Beyonce were didn't look the way she does, it wouldn't have mattered. There would have been no complaint. Like the anger, poor Killer Mike is feeling, visited upon him because he quoted me when I said that the possession of a uterus does not make you more qualified to be president of the United States. When I said that, nobody said anything because I'm an old white woman. I can get away with anything. I am free. But a young black male saying the same thing was brave enough to say it, but did not get any positive reaction for it. You see, we're talking about racism and sexism here. And if you haven't read Lillian Smith's book, Killers of the Dream, you don't really know where all this stuff is coming from. You don't really know what is going on in many of the minds of black men and of white men and white women where black males are concerned. It's time for people to realize that they've been conditioned for too long to a myth, the myth of race. We need to get over it. I had no problem with Beyonce any more than I would have a problem with Lady Gaga. And some of her performances have been pretty interesting, haven't they?
To say the least.
There's a major difference there.
Yeah.
Some of us are free. We live in the land of the free and the home of the brave. White folks are free. People of color have to be brave. Make no mistake about that.
What would you say about the conversation going on now about political correctness and, I guess, colleges and that whole culture that...
Wait a minute. Let me short-circuit you on that. Political correctness is an attempt to limit our freedom of speech.
Mm-hmm.
Make no mistake about that. And if you think I'm lying about that, read Nat Hentoff's book, Free Speech for Me, but Not for Thee.
Okay.
I'm perfectly happy to have people make totally ridiculous, politically incorrect remarks so that I can respond to them.
Mm-hmm.
You live with the consequences of your behavior. If you're going to say something racist in my presence, I'm going to come at you for it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you don't want me to come at you for those remarks, keep your mouth shut or say something that isn't racist.
Mm-hmm.
If what you are saying can be perceived as racist, sexist, ageist, homophobic, ethnocentric, go ahead and say it, and then somebody will teach you why you shouldn't have. Because people don't want to live with the consequences of their behavior. They do not want to be accused of being racist while they're making a racist remark. And they'll say, I'm not racist, some of my best friends are black. And I love that one. Or somebody will say, some fool will say to me, I don't see color. That tickles me to death when they say that one. People ought to be careful about the kinds of things they say to people like me, because I will respond in ways that will make them sound absolutely stupid. And people who say to me, we're all alike under the skin. You sound like a man, are you?
Yes, I am.
Yes.
Yeah.
You realize that I'm a female, right?
Yes.
You think you and I are the same under the skin?
No, not totally.
No, you know we're not. It's all right for us to be. It's all right for us to be different under the skin. We have the right to be the way we were born.
Exactly.
And when you say to somebody, I have watched a foolish white woman diddle up to an aggressive black woman when I was working and say, I've seen you so long I don't see you as black anymore. At which point that black woman said, we should go down to the optometrist. You obviously have an eye problem. It was like, oh my God, do you realize what you've just done? See, white people have the freedom to run their mouths whenever they want to and however they want to, without fear of being corrected.
Mm-hmm.
Unless somebody like me happens to be standing next to them. And then they are careful about the things they say, because they know that I'm a white woman and I don't have to take it, and I don't have to accept it, and I don't have to take it as they say they meant it.
Mm-hmm.
But when you say to a person of color, when I see you, I don't see you black, that person immediately knows that you're either a fool or a liar, or you think you're getting away with something, and you don't think much of the person you're talking to. If they would say, when I see you, I don't see you green, or when I see you, I don't see you orange, then they'd be telling the truth. But when you say to a person of color, when I see you, I don't see you black, has anybody ever said to you, when I see you, I don't see you male?
Never.
Never. Would you appreciate it if they did?
No, I wouldn't, because that's what I am.
Well, that's right. And black is what black people are.
Yeah.
And they have a right to be seen that way, because the first modern human beings that evolved on this earth were black females. Mm-hmm. Make no mistake about that.
Yep.
And without them, there would be none of the rest of us. Those are my sisters. Long time ago. I'm here because of them, and so are you.
Yep. I mean, again, you're right, though.
Other questions you don't want answered?
No. I again, as a black, like me, being a black man myself, I've experienced some of the subtle racism that goes on even here in Toronto. A lot of people say to me, "Oh, we live in Toronto. It's a post-racial city and all these things," and I say, maybe from your perspective it is, but I experience it a completely different way than I think a lot of other people do.
Absolutely. You need to read Ann Wilson Schaff's book, Women's Reality, and realize that your reality isn't the same as mine. Mm-hmm. You and I don't live in the same world.
Exactly.
We don't live in the same reality, and when we say to people of color, well, you're just imagining that, we're denying their reality. We don't have the right to do that. I don't see things the way males see them. I don't see them the way black females see them. I don't see them the way Asian females or males see them, because I live in a different reality. And we have to realize that and accept others' reality as being just as valid as our own. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does. It totally does. And that's something I think is important, especially, and also, too, just to have the conversation about these kinds of things, I think is important.
But white people won't talk about these things because especially to a person of color, because we're afraid we'll say something racist. We will. We've been conditioned to talk in racist ways. So what we need to do is say to ourselves and to other people, I'm going to discuss this with you, and I will probably say things that you take as racist, and if you'll tell me, I won't say them again. But we won't get that education unless we talk to a person of color who's willing to say, you know, what you just said is blatantly racist. That's the way I take it. If what you are saying can be perceived as one of the isms, don't say it. Think of something else. People don't know what not to say. But if you go to my website, Jane Elliott at janeelliott.com, I think that's what it is. I can't remember. Anyway, Google Jane Elliott, you'll find my website. And on that website are some printed learning materials. One of them, the first one, is a page of typical statements that white folks make that think they aren't being racist. You don't have to read them, go through them. You don't have to, but you don't have to check the ones that you would agree with. After you've done that, if you're white, then go to the clarifications of those statements and find out why you ought not to be saying them. Then you're going to say, well, what can we do about this? You didn't give us any solutions. Oh, yeah. Go to the next set of learning materials, which is a set of commitments to combat racism. Now, many of those materials came right out of a book written by, I can't remember. Oh, dear, here we go again. I'm having a senior moment, and that's not ageism, that's just fact. Look on my website. I think it says on my website where those came from. You need to read those. You need to go through those. You need to have, white people need to educate themselves. At this point, racism in white people is not white privilege. It is white ignorance. Purely and simply white ignorance. After the age of 15, if you don't know these things, that's self-imposed ignorance. You have decided not to learn.
I guess in conclusion, what is, I mean, you've spent a lot of your life devoted to social issues. What do you, again, hope for the future, or what message would you want people to take from the things that you've done in your life?
Well, I would hope that white people would stop blaming racism on people of color. Invariably, I've gotten 3 letters this week that say, when I was little, there were no blacks in our community, so we didn't have any racism. Oh my God. As if you have to have a black person around to have a racist. Racism is white ignorance about skin color. It is not something caused by blacks. It is something, it's a reaction built into us by our conditioning, our racist conditioning. You don't have to have people of color in your community to have racism. All you have to have is a racist curriculum, which teaches that the Indians were savages and we came here to civilize them, which teaches that Columbus discovered America. When you can't discover a place where people are already living, they discovered it before you got here, where you teach that all the heroes were white males and all the villains were people of color or ignorant women. When you have the kind of curriculum that we have in the schools these days, and have had for 400 years, you're bound to have a community in which white is right. Well, white rhymes with right and bright. It also rhymes with spite and fright and flight. And white flight is the reason there are more children attending segregated schools in this country today than there were previous to Brown versus Board of Education. Did you realize that?
No, I did not know that.
That's the truth. That's a fact. And you can look it up and you can find out that I'm telling the truth about that. Now, that isn't because blacks want all to be in the inner city. It's because white people have gone to the suburbs so they won't have to have their children raised around those black children. That is called racism. And because of redlining, black people are going to be allowed only to buy homes where white folks don't want to live. And we've been doing that for a good long time. And we have not stopped. Well, you need to read Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow. We are right back where we were in the 50s, or the 40s, where black males are concerned. Particularly, since we don't have a war that we can send a whole lot of them to right now, we don't have any place to put those black males. So we are building more prisons than we are building schools. And if you think that's an accident, you need to take another look.
Oh, well.
Aren't you glad you called?
I am. All right. Well, thank you for taking your time out to talk to me. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having the courage to call.